Silent Hill is often regarded as one of the greatest survival horror games to have ever been created. A lot of people will put this at the top of the survival horror list right next to Resident Evil, some saying it's even stronger than Resident Evil, and I could make a strong argument as to why those people who say that are not wrong. Silent Hill has seen a shift in direction over the years as its own developmental issues have started, and it's never fully gotten back on track. Today, we are going to be taking a look at the game that started it all. Against all odds, a team who failed at other projects would go on to create what has been held as one of the best video game series of all time. But how does it hold up? Is it worth playing today? Is Silent Hill as scary today as it was back then? Well, sit back, relax, subscribe to the channel. Let's find out as we review Silent Hill. Silent Hill is very much a Japanese horror-based video game, and what I mean by that is Western horror and Japanese horror tend to be very different. Western horror tends to focus more on the gore factor or the slasher films such as Halloween and Friday the 13th, just to name a few, while Japan tends to focus a lot more on the psychological aspects of their horror, The Ring and The Grudge being the two most prominent examples outside of Japan. Because of this, there is a key difference in the way that these storytellings are definitely told, and I think through psychological horror you get to kind of get that personal connection with your protagonist and your characters quite a bit more. And I think this is what makes Silent Hill stand out so much against other survival horror games, especially of the time. I won't sit there and say that Harry Mason is an amazing character that goes through this giant arc of development throughout the game, but you can clearly tell the love that he has for his daughter Cheryl as he continues to look for her. It is this vulnerable state that they put Harry in, as he's just a regular dude with no real special abilities, just a writer looking to find his lost child. It is this kind of storytelling that really makes Silent Hill effective. And even to this day, I still feel the story holds up very well, considering it can be very convoluted at times and there's a lot of things kind of happening in the background that aren't fully explained. But I still think the story is really good, and it kept me going through the game's narratives as I had to see what happened next. So let's talk a little bit about its story and what it's about. You play as Harry Mason, a father going on vacation with his daughter Cheryl to the resort town of Silent Hill. After their car crashes, Cheryl goes missing and Harry starts to search around the town for her. To no avail. He soon discovers the town is filled with monsters out of nightmares, and something is clearly not right with this town. Harry meets Sybil Bennett, a cop from the next town over who is also stuck in Silent Hill, Dr. Kaufman, as well as a nurse named Lisa, who is stuck in the local hospital. Dahlia is a creepy old lady who has very strong connections to the town. By no means are any of the characters exceptional or really stand out for that matter, but as a first attempt, they do get the job done. Silent Hill is definitely a game that is more about the story, so much so than it is the characters. And this is seen as the game starts to kind of flash the events of what happened, and you start to learn more about just whose mind you're kind of playing in. What's kind of funny is you can start to see a lot of Silent Hill's inspiration throughout other horror games, particularly with the story. There's definitely remnants of Silent Hill within a game such as The Evil Within, and whether or not Shinji Mikami took inspiration from Silent Hill, I haven't found any conclusive evidence that he did, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did at some point, was very inspired by some of the events that took place during Silent Hill's story. I would definitely say that the story tends to be dark, gritty, horrifying, and rewarding. This game is definitely worthy of playing of its story alone. There were just some events I'm like, wow, that is dark, and elements I didn't expect the story to go off and take. Silent Hill still to this day has a very incredible story, and it took me by surprise in so many different ways. One of the key things to making a successful horror game is finding a way to immerse the player into your world. There are a bunch of ways to do this, such as more modern games like Outlast and Amnesia, leaving the player completely vulnerable with no way to defend themselves. This oftentimes gets them to find areas to hide and avoid their attackers that way, whereas a game like Resident Evil and Silent Hill rely more on inventory management. Both of these are very much survival horror aspects, taken in a very different direction. Silent Hill and Resident Evil really focused on item management, conserving your bullets, conserving your health for more difficult or problematic enemies, or saving them for those boss fights that just became absolutely ridiculous and frustrating that got in your way. There's definitely this sense of, I need to save this, I need to not use as much health items because I don't want to waste them, so that encourages you to run past enemies and not fire at enemies, or maybe just knock an enemy down and run past them if you don't need to, kill them to explore a room. Those moments right there are what makes these games so effective, and Silent Hill adds on to this beautifully as well by not only giving your character a handgun and a shotgun, two things that would be fairly common for people to find laying around the world, but it also gives you an axe, a knife, and even an emergency pickaxe. These are all things that you might find laying about in every day-to-day life, kind of adding to this immersion that you are just playing as a regular dude. Someone who isn't going to have access to something like an RPG or a submachine gun or something like that. Finding those everyday objects to defend off your attackers adds so much to this game's immersion. So let's talk a little bit about its gameplay and how the survival horror and puzzle elements really come together in Silent Hill to create a really unique experience. Item management is often a complaint that I hear about people who are not used to the survival horror genre. Simply put, if you're looking to kill every enemy you encounter, you're going to have a hard time. Silent Hill executes this wonderfully. Ammunition is scarce enough you want to hoard it, and health is spread out frequently enough that I found myself in the most parts alright, aside from a few instances towards the end of the game. Though I will admit it was probably my fault due to trying to take out as many enemies with the melee weapons as I could. As a matter of fact, you're going to want to save most of your shotgun and rifle ammo for the mid and end of the game. Let's address the elephant in the room, the tank controls. Everyone likes to harp on tank controls, and I do get that they are not my favorite, but when it comes to a game with fixed camera angles, it's almost a necessity. And sitting down and getting used to the controls is just part of the experience. And though I haven't played a game with tank controls for a very long time, I was able to get back into the flow of things within about 5 minutes. The combat can feel clunky at times, especially when it comes to melee weapons. Most of the time it comes down to basic timing and knowing when to swing and hold down X for strong attacks, or pressing X a couple times for a quick swing. Shooting works well enough, but strafing and dodging enemies does need a little bit of work. This is probably my biggest complaint when it comes to the combat alone, especially with those damned flying enemies towards the end section of the game. The puzzles were challenging and fun, and a few tripped me up, ultimately leading me to need to look up a walkthrough to see what the answers were. Silent Hill has well-rounded gameplay, and even by today's standard, despite some of the game feeling a bit clunky in controls and outdated mechanics, I'm actually really looking forward to seeing how the controls evolve as we delve deeper into the next 3 Silent Hill games. Alright, let's talk about how scary Silent Hill is, because we are playing a survival horror game after all. Silent Hill is creepy as hell. There were plenty of times during this game that it made me jump out of my skin. The use of the radio is absolutely pure brilliance on Team Silent's part. It makes you anticipate those enemies, and you know that their presence is there, but you can't always see them, oftentimes resulting in you getting snuck up on and taking damage, or turning around and seeing an enemy charge towards you because you think they're in the opposite direction, but they're not. It leads into that anticipation, you know it's there, and then boom, the enemy is just there. Something else that the game does that adds a lot to the scary factor of the game is the dense fog that is through Silent Hill. It is through the fog that Harry Mason has a hard time seeing, but so do you. The limited visibility adds to the horror as well, because you can't always see the enemies super far away until they're up close enough, and sometimes almost too close, literally scaring the shit out of you. Something else that keeps the game scary as well is the OST. The composer did an excellent job working loud sounds and ambient music into this game's soundtrack. There's oftentimes you'll just go into a room and you expect an enemy to be there because the song is loud and creepy and gives you this vibe of something is watching you. But then you realize there's nothing in that room. Once you kind of start to realize that because the music starts to escalate though, and there's nothing in that room, the scare factor of that eventually does die off. But those first few moments of realizing, oh shit, there might be something in this room because the music and sound changes, definitely creeps the hell out of you at the very beginning. But there are some cases, such as the sewers, that the radio also doesn't alert you when a monster is present. Monsters are just kind of there, and you have to rely on what you can see and just be extremely careful in the sewer areas. It can be quite frustrating, but fun at the same time. Something I don't often hear people talk about with Silent Hill is the name of the streets, or what the streets are based off of. Each street is based off of a prolific horror writer, such as Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King, or Dean Koontz, or Michael Crichton. There is one street that is this exception called Midwich, but that is also based off of a book called The Midwich Cuckoos by a guy named John Wyndham. Also, I felt kind of cool piecing these together, as it's just something that I was like, hey, this is kind of cool. Considering that my dad read a lot of those books growing up as a kid, they were names I was very familiar with. And the OST, as I said, is absolutely pure brilliance. The whole final boss theme, no joke. One of the sounds you hear during that is a distorted dentist drill. I heard that, I'm like, wow, no wonder people are so terrified of dentist drills already. So to incorporate that in there, the composer did such a wonderful job. Silent Hill, hands down, was an absolute fun game to play through. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with this game, and I have no problem giving it my Gaming with Spoon seal of approval. Seriously, if you haven't played this game and you call yourself a horror enthusiast, you are missing out, and you absolutely need to pick up this game. I can't recommend it to everybody because there are going to be those people who are going to have a hard time getting into it because of the graphics and some of the outdated gameplay mechanics that the game does use. Despite it doing really cool things like showing you where you've been on the map and marking those very well, there are going to be people who are just not going to get past the tank controls and have a hard time playing this game. But if you can, an absolute gem to play. Absolutely amazing game. The story still holds up. The creep factor is there. The OST is absolutely amazing. And the survival horror elements in the game are very well done. I wouldn't go as far to say I enjoyed this as much as I did the Resident Evil 2 OG, the first one on the PlayStation, because that is one of my favorite video games of all times. But I would definitely put Silent Hill on a list of top 10 must-play PlayStation 1 games. It is that good. This game, though, is in desperate need of a remake, and playing through this game has made me realize that more than ever. This is a game that, true and tried, deserves a chance to be reborn in 3D on a modern engine with a chance to be experienced by more people. Konami needs to get on this. Konami needs to give the franchise to somebody then, if they're not going to do it, who clearly cares about the franchise and is willing to propel this franchise into new heights, because Silent Hill deserves a resurgence. And playing through this game for the very first time has made me realize that. This has been my review of Silent Hill and the kickoff of the Halloween special on the channel. This is something we're going to continue to do every Halloween, take a look at survival horror games and review them for the channel. We're still going to, throughout the rest of the year, do reviews for other games, most notably Japanese RPG, since that is what we do play most on the channel. But we are going to continue our reviews by going in and reviewing Silent Hill 2, 3, and 4. As of the recording of this video, we are about halfway through Silent Hill 2, so I should have that review up sometime, I'm hoping, by next week. If you guys like what you see and want to continue to see reviews just like this, and make sure you check out that Silent Hill 2 once it goes live, hit subscribe, ring that bell notification so you do not miss it, and most importantly, stay happy, be happy, game happy. Spoons is checking out.